Well, welcome everyone. I am Sita Severson from the Soul of Yoga Institute in Encinitas, California, and I am really genuinely deeply excited to speak with our guest today, Dr. Richard Miller. So I do want to say this right off the bat. The caveat is this is not a selly type of podcast, but you will notice that I am a fan of iRest and also the International Association of Yoga Therapists, to which he has a lot to do with both of those, as you will learn. So if it sounds like I am a cheerleader for these organizations, you're right, I am. But that's part of what makes this a really fun conversation for me because I feel like there are so many curiosities and so many ways that these organizations have made such a deep impact in my life and the impact of people that I am here to support. And so I really am delighted that I get to share this amazing, very accomplished man with you, and hopefully in ways that you'll be able to get to know him. Even if you're familiar with him and his work, you might be able to get to know him in some new and different ways. So welcome. I'm so happy to have you here, Dr. Richard.
Thank you. And, you can drop the doctor, just Richard is good.
Okay. How about Richard G? With the utmost respect. So I do want to share just a little bit about you for those of you who aren't familiar with you and your work. But you're of course, a certified international yoga therapist. You are a co-founder, if I'm not mistaken, a co-founder of the International Association of Yoga Therapists. And you are the executive director of iRest, which is one of it's something that you've pioneered that we will talk about extensively today. Richard is also a clinical psychologist, an author, a researcher, yogic scholar, and a spiritual teacher. He has over 50 years of experience in this world. And he has had many very significant accolades that are well deserved because of his research and his extensive study and experience in supporting people with chronic pain and PTSD. The U.S. Army Surgeon General and Defense Centers of Excellence have recognized iRest as a complementary program for healing chronic pain and PTSD, which I can attest to with my own clients. So I'm really excited to talk about some of that. And so he leads international trainings, meditation retreats that you are always welcome to check out. In fact, I deeply encourage you to check out all the things which we'll get into, because I will save this for later, but I do want to say this right off the bat. So when I was in my yoga therapy training through the Soul of Yoga, that was when I was introduced to Richard's work. And so I knew I was going in for part of the training is getting your level 1 with iRest. So we get to learn about, just the foundational aspects of iRest and all that it has to offer. And I will tell you that I was delighted when I learned that there was so much more than meditation. And so even though I know that iRest meditation or iRest is usually synonymous with some form of meditation, specifically a form of Yoga Nidra, which we'll get into all of this, guys. If you're not familiar, don't worry. You don't need a secret handshake to listen. But I was really delighted when I learned that there were ways been a Vedic counselor since 2007, and I've been teaching Yoga Nidra, and I've been working individually with people. I'm an Ayurvedic practitioner, and I didn't know that there was this whole way of working with my clients in such a rich way that wasn't necessarily about guiding them into meditation. And so that's something I really do want to talk about. We're not going to start there, but you can see I'm excited. And so I had to say that so we can all sort of sticky note that, because that just a delightful surprise for me. That was a game changer for me in my own personal journey, but also with the people that I work with. So thank you. I know I just I get excited. But I really am so happy that you've taken the time to be here with us today. And honestly, what I'd really love to know is you have all of this experience. What led you to start your yoga journey to begin with? Are you one of those people who you were sort of born into just questioning the universe or being a seeker, or did you stumble upon it? How did that even come to be? Because, I think in our world today, a lot of people sometimes feel lost and kind of wonder what their dharma is. And I think, there's a way that it's always sort of a built-in mechanism within us, but there is a way that the universe, the cosmic intelligence, will always find a way to guide us into whatever that is. So I'm really curious to know, how did this all begin for you?
It's a great question because I think the simple answer is it's a mystery
Haha.
for all of us. How did we get here and this path that each of us is treading? You use that word dharma, the root of the word dharma, rutta, RTA, means basically to be feeling your place in the universe. And I think each of us is a unique expression of this underlying essence that's given birth to the entire cosmos and to each one of us. And I think each one of us is a valuable member in however we're living our life. But to go back to me, I have several very early memories. One when I was less than 2 years of age, where all of a sudden my sense of being a separate self came online. I happened to be standing at the moment in front of my sister, who a moment ago wasn't a sister. There was no thing called sister or bed or walls, but all of a sudden there was a person in front of me that felt separate, and I knew it then as my sister. The bed, the table, the walls, the doors, they all of a sudden appeared. And what I've come to understand is around that age, we all begin to fall prey or to inhabit this sense of being a separate self. I jokingly say that was the start of my suffering
I
because
love that.
to me, in that moment when we begin to separate, something in us starts to feel something's amiss here. We just stepped out of our unicity into a sense of separation. So that really dogged me during my childhood. I had a number of physical ailments during my childhood that put me into severe chronic pain, sometimes being hospitalized as a child to be put to sleep, actually, because I was in so much pain. And I learned back then that if I lay quiet with a mask over my face, an ice bag on my neck, an ice bag on my feet, and I lay completely quiet without a thought, I had no pain. Now, I did that out of desperation, trying whatever I could to relieve myself of pain. But looking back, I can see that was my first venture into meditation, where I realized if I didn't think without thoughts, there wasn't pain. What I then had a number of experiences when I was 13 in Florida during a vacation, lying in a sand trap of all things at night, when I had this moment of wondering, I wonder where the end of the universe is out there. And I went out in my imagination, came to a brick wall and thought, oh, it's the end of the universe. And then I thought, well, what's on the other side of the brick wall? And I kept doing that over and over until there was a moment literally where everything dissolved into that, what I would call unicity experience. And then I walked back 13-year-old life as if nothing had happened. But then at 22, I had that experience again with who became my first mentor, who really began to help me explore this whole notion of what keeps suffering in place, what keeps us feeling lonely or sometimes depressed or isolated, which is what I grew up feeling like. How do you do this social thing? And as I began to explore it and began to realize that the sense of separation is actually something that um, we identify in and get lost in. But as we heal that and we're able to make breakthrough recognition moments of not being separate with everything around us, for me, that began a tremendous movement or transformative um, qualities in my life where I started to feel a sense of being at home in myself. And in 1970, along around that same time, I took a yoga class, not ever having taken yoga before, as a way of meeting people. And the woman at the end of the class taught her what I now know is a rudimentary Yoga Nidra. And again, I had a most transformative, powerful experience where I walked out feeling at one with the universe, not separate. And that launched, I would say, my career in that moment because I became fascinated, number one, in what just happened. What was the approach that I had been taught in that class, and how could I learn more? So that really launched me into the exploration of meditation per se. Yoga Nidra is a form of meditation and led me to many gifted teachers around the world that I've had the privilege of studying with. And coming to put together what now people know as iRest as a form of meditation inquiry, which is really looking at how do we integrate and harmonize completely into our being human, where we're on comfortable terms with our emotions, our body, our mind, our thoughts, and healing this, what I've come to recognize as the underlying structure that keeps suffering in place, this sense of separation. It's not that we deny our uniqueness. We're each a unique expression, aren't we? But there's a way that we can feel an underlying essence, I would say, that informs everything and is an intelligence within each of us that helps us find our place in the universe, which is what I feel I've found through these studies and meditations and things I've been engaged in now for over 50 years. I don't know if that speaks directly to your question,
Yeah,
but
it's
that's
perfect.
what comes to me.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And I really do love the way that you um, have shared the meaning of Dharma, because I do feel like a lot of people get, I mean, there's businesses built on helping people find their purpose. Like it's this big mystical thing that's out there that one day they'll find and everything will be something, or everything will happen after that point. And to frame it from a place of its true essence, I feel has it's like the natural antidote of sort of soothing the ego self that wants to really jump in and make it a thing, when the invitation is the remembering that you are already that thing.
Well, you bring to me, you're bringing home a really important point, and it reminds me of this one fellow who was in one of our research studies in Florida many years ago, who had severe PTSD, and he took my program as part of a training that was being offered at the VA where he was participating, and he made an interesting remark. He said every training that he had been in, every intervention to help him resolve his post-traumatic stress from his military service had always started with what was wrong with him, trying to help him heal from what was wrong to get back to what was right. He said, "You're the first program that actually started with what was right about me. And then from there, I could look at what needed healing." And I think this is the underlying principle, certainly that I work from, is we have within us already a place that, and to use your word, when we recognize it, we realize there's something within us that's never been hurt, never been harmed, never been injured, doesn't need healing, and it is our home ground. And then from that place, we can look at what may need healing in our body and our mind. But then we're not confusing our sense of self with some changing circumstance. We're really embedded then in a very deep sense of our basic beingness. And there was a wonderful research study that was done years ago at Stanford where they were looking at what gives a person a sense of meaning, value, and purpose. And so many people, I think, get their meaning and their value and their purpose from what they do. But what we do is ultimately going to come to an end.
Mm.
So, how can we find a deeper sense of meaning, purpose, and value in our basic beingness that is not based on what we're doing, but is basically our ground of being? And I think when we become established in that, then yes, we may find things that we're doing in the world that make sense and provide a sense of meaning and purpose as well. But we're coming then from a deeper ground of basic meaning and purpose and value that's not predicated on where we are, who we're with, or what we're doing. And that's what the teachings to me are all about, helping us discover that basic ground that's already here.
Mm.
It's not out there. And so we've got to change our glasses, you might say, from outward looking glasses to inward looking glasses to make that discovery.
I love that. That's so beautiful. And so the thing that comes up for me when I'm listening to you talk, particularly when you were sharing about when you were younger and you had that moment where you noticed that there was this distinction or separation between yourself and what's out there, quote
Mhm.
unquote, it makes me curious about that being sort of one of the causes of why so frequently we run, especially as I think it starts as children for most of us, but we run into this place of compliance. We start to become conditioned. And I know for myself, compliance was a really big part of my story. It was if my mother or my teacher was suggesting or telling me, or someone was telling me that this was who you're supposed to be or how you're supposed to be, well, then that was how I did it. And so obviously for me it was a lot of reasons, years of
Mhm.
therapy, but I think for just the most basic sense, for most of us being humans and being people who long to be connected naturally to some capacity, um, where do you think this drive to comply or the conditioning comes in as that part of ourself that feels fragmented and yet longs for that sense of oneness, unity, wholeness, and really being the beingness or our true essence?
Isn't mirroring a necessary part of our development? We have within us our own sense, but we have a developing nervous system that doesn't have the cognitive capacities, say at age 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So we're depending on the outside people around us as, in a way, I call them sacred mirrors.
Mm.
But oftentimes, what we're getting mirrored back is people who've been in compliance themselves all their life and have not fully found within themselves their home.
Mm.
And they themselves are caught in different ways of separating from, say, emotions or thoughts or experiences that may have been overwhelming in their lifetime. So I think for most of us, we get inadequate mirroring growing up, and we're looking to the outside for direction as children.
Mm.
I think as we grow and become adults, we begin to run into where we've been compliant that's no longer working. And that can be a scary moment where we're realizing that these kinds of ways of behaving, which seem to serve us initially, because they're part of our survival instinctual way of being. We're in a family, we're in a culture. It's the one that we're growing up into. We want to be part of a culture. We want to be part of a group. If we stand alone, we won't survive early on. So compliance to me is a necessary, sometimes unfortunate aspect that we grow up into. But at some point, we have to face that and reconcile where compliance is no longer working and step into a more authentic way of being, which in a way is like shedding old clothes that are no longer fitting. And that can be a really scary proposition. I remember when I was in my early 20s, really recognizing I had fallen into so many ways of complying that were now unconscious, but I could realize that they were in some way underpinning that sense of separation and alienation I was feeling. And so I think we all are going to be faced with that moment one way or another, and to step out of those old clothes into a whole new way of being.
Yeah, it's funny. I think to one of the bigger moments that I had like that, which actually tomorrow is the 27th anniversary of that. I actually stopped drinking when I was 20 years old in 1998, and I was really at that kind of moment in my life. And I refer to it as the great cosmic clue by four, where it was interesting because, and I know this can happen to a lot of people, and it can be a little disorienting, where sometimes, of course, there are things that will happen in our life that are mirroring and reflecting back, like something's not working anymore. For me, it was this profound moment that was very internal, where nothing outside of me seemingly had changed, but something inside of me had shifted just enough where I knew that I could not continue living in some of the ways that I was living. I didn't know anything else, and I certainly didn't know what that looked like. But that's why I call it the cosmic clue by four, because it was like something just bonked me on the head, and it was that moment that sent my life in a completely different trajectory.
And for me, it was my first mentor. I called it baseball bat meditation because if I would begin to separate out, it was as if she were knocking me over the side of the head to bring me back to myself. And it also reminds me the first exercise I was given by her was to take out a full length mirror,
Hmm.
sit in front of it, and ask the interesting question, how do you feel about this person in the mirror?
Hmm.
And how does the person in the mirror feel about you?
Hmm.
And it began the process of peeling away the different images that I had been encultured into through my family, through my culture, through my personal experiences, and really began that process, I would say, of the person in the mirror beginning to like the person who is over here, and the person over here beginning to like the person in the mirror. And I think at some point we all have to look into that sacred mirror and fall in love in such a way as it is said in poetry, no you, no me, no we, just this sense of uh, being and meeting each moment from that ground of being.
I love that. So with iRest, how did that start to come to fruition? I know if you could speak a little bit about um, iRest. I know the story a little bit about how you had to shorten the name, but I would love to hear, like, I believe that you started out in veterans hospitals or something of the sort with people who really had acute and serious issues. I mean, to me, talk about guided, because this was a long time ago. You're very pioneering and having really been oriented towards the trauma recovery and PTSD and somatic experiencing, which is, something that it's these days it feels like it's just like saying, can you pass the ketchup at the dinner table? In some ways, I don't know that that's great, because I think that the depth of what's really going on has been a little bit lost and watered down. And so one of the things that I really do appreciate about iRest specifically is that it takes timeless teachings that I follow in my own life, which maybe you could speak a little bit more about
Mhm.
that as well, um, and really helps, I feel, people of today really understand and be able to have the experience of its relevancy without alienating anyone. There are a lot of
Mm.
people who are not going to be interested in the Upanishads and self-inquiry and Tantra, and they don't really understand it. And so I feel that part of the brilliance of this work is not only did you pioneer something and help set the foundation for a much bigger conversation that's happening now, thank you and thank God for that, but it also makes it accessible to so many people. So I know that was a lot, but whatever comes up for you, I would
Mhm.
love to hear what you have to say about that.
Well, if I go back into the 70s when I was beginning to learn this approach and I began studying it, and one of my first teachers who I was studying with asked me to begin to teach some of the components that I was learning as a way of deepening my own learning. And I began to look at the people that I was working with. Um, what was it that they were most needing? So it began a process of interviewing the people that I was working with rather than just coming in and saying, I have this to teach you. I was really looking at that was most important to them. And what I discovered, and I had back then a studio that I had created where I was teaching yoga, meditation, breathing. I was also training as a Chinese medicine acupuncture practitioner. Um, and also, I was a licensed psychotherapist at that time. So I had a number of hats that I was beginning to look at, not as separate pieces, but how might they integrate? And what I realized was so many people who were coming to my studio to feel better actually had a lot of different um, background elements going on in their life. Some people had multiple sclerosis. Some people were experiencing cancer. Some people had tremendous back pain. Some people had marriage, relational problems. And so I began to look at the meditation and the kind of work that I was learning and teaching and what we might call Yoga Nidra structure. Um, I began to adapt it to the individuals that I was working with, and they began to help me hone the process. And just a quick definition of how I'm looking at Yoga Nidra. Yoga means for me someone who um, is embodying that sense of grounded peace or ease or equanimity in themselves. That's the word yoga. And then nidra, while it means a state of sleep, it's actually meaning a state of changing consciousness. So it means somebody who's able to have that quality of equanimity no matter what other state of consciousness they might be experiencing, whether it was a physical disability, a moment of grief, somebody had died, um, they still had that sense of equanimity. So I was looking at how can I help people pull out that deep sense of equanimity and then meet the issues that they were facing. So in those early years, we were actually running groups for MS people, for people with back pain, people who had depression and anxiety, and it was helping me hone my delivery. Then, as you know, in around 2003, I was approached by the military. One of my friends now had been teaching one of my processes at Walter Reed Army Medical Center, and a researcher happened to be there that day, noticed the possibility of its effect it might have with military with PTSD. So I entered into a research study back in 2003 and 4 with returning wounded warriors with very severe PTSD. And at the end of the study, they were all out of the range of post-traumatic stress. And so they recognized the efficacy of the protocol that I had developed, and they started integrating it into the healing regimens at Walter Reed Army Medical Center. And that grew to other research projects. So we've had about 45 research projects to date: depression, sleep disorders, pain, anxiety, post-traumatic stress, and well-being, among others. So it was really a long process of the people that I was working with helping me see how to best offer them the practices that would most serve them. And to today, that's what I still do. When someone comes to me, I don't know where we're going. It's our interaction and them helping me discover what might be the appropriate intervention. You maybe heard my say this story, but when I was in India studying with TKV Desikachar yoga therapy back in 1980, I spent many years studying privately in groups with Desikachar and honor him as one of my foremost teachers. But in our first lesson, he was asking me some of the things that I was coming to him for. And at that time, I wanted to learn more about meditation and the Yoga Sutras. So I told him about that. But I also mentioned that I had a severe neck injury, and might he be able to help it through some of his yoga therapeutic interventions. So he gave me a series of things to do and said, practice these for the next few days, come back and let me know how they worked. So I went away, I practiced what he had gave me. I came back 3 days later and I said, well, truthfully, my pain is worse for what you've given me. And I'll never forget what he said. He said, now we know what not to do.
Wisdom, true
And
wisdom.
what I came to realize was it's the relationship that's so important, because if I hadn't had some respect for him, I would have done what he had given me, felt worse, and never gone back. But I trusted him. And basically, what he was revealing to me is, given what you reported to me, I gave you my best first thought of what might be helpful. But now that I know that that's not, here, try this. So we began to experiment together in relationship, and slowly we discovered the right things for me to do. And luckily, that helped heal the pain that I had been suffering for many years from my neck. So it really gave me the recognition that it is our relationship that's really important, that we trust each other, that we have the best intention, but it's a collaboration that we're entering into. And IRES to me is a collaborative intervention. Certainly, there are things I can teach, but I really want to understand the person that I'm working with, and then I can best give my offerings. And then it's in working together that we discover the process that's most beneficial.
Mhm.
But I will say, even that, with each person that I work with in the first session, I want to see if I can help them touch that internal intelligence that gives them a sense of home,
Mm.
of a breakthrough moment of, this is what I'm looking for. One woman came to me some years ago. We were working, she had a very severe depression, and she'd understood that I taught Yoga Nidra and wanted to see if it might be helpful. And in that first lesson, I gave her a bit of helped her have that experience of that sense of home. And what was interesting to me is she came back a week later for a second session with me. And she said, I want you to know that that feeling of being home and that sense of essence that you helped me recognize within myself disappeared after just a few hours. But what remained was a sense of hope.
Mm.
For the first time, I felt hope that I had a way of working with and working through my depression. And so we started every session helping her feel that sense of inner essence and presence and beingness. And then from there, we would address what might have been underpinning the depression. And that made all the difference. We were slowly able to undo the depression, and she was able to stay in touch with that underlying essence. Um, I think it's really important that we as practitioners are really learning how to listen to our students. But more than that, I think as human beings, we're learning how to listen to one another, whether we're in the marketplace having a cup of tea or in line at the supermarket. We're really just, aren't we, one human being listening and being with another, hopefully from a very deep sense of heartfelt kindness and love and compassion, which I think these teachings bring out of us ultimately.
Absolutely. And I'm thinking about the many, many countless people that I have shared iRest with. I'm actually I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, I'm not sure that I've had a client or even friends that I haven't shared a recording that I've done or a recording that you've done that are on the website, the iRest website. I'm not, I don't know that there's anyone that I haven't shared it with. And the reason that is because I'm not, I'm saying this with the deepest respect in my heart and not in a, oh, it's a cure all. It'll do everything. It'll help and
Mhm.
whatever, everyone. It's not like that at all. If you have an iRest experience, you'll understand what I mean. So I've worked with, of course, plenty of people who have physical issues that they come to me for. I have a lot of people who come to me more, though, for emotional or spiritual reasons.
Mhm.
And so, what I really love is I think about one of my very best friends. She's 75 years old. Her health is actually really great. She's really beautiful. She's a lifelong seeker. She was, in ashrams in the 70s. She was the person that everybody thought was weird going to Whole Foods in a sari back in the United States. But everything is essentially okay in her world. But as she gets older and older, she's really leaning more into the sort of what's next in my beingness. And so she has actually had, and I had texted her. I said, please send me something so I can share it when I'm speaking with Richard. But she's been under the weather. But she's had some of the most mystical experiences of her life using this practice, which she uses on a daily basis. And this is someone who has had a guru and who has really been very spiritually oriented since 40 plus years ago. And so that's when you talk about the ability to really connect with people and just really be present and really just be with what is. What I deeply love about this practice is I feel like it truly is the practice of how do we not cognitively understand how to do that? How do we learn to truly drop into a genuine experience of ourselves so that it will help us explore and discover what it is that we need? And to me, it's a sacred medicine that way, because to me, a true medicine, it knows what we need. We might think we're working with something for a specific ailment when really it's something over here that needs to be addressed. And so I find that with the range of people that I've worked with using iRest, it seems to meet them wherever they are and help take them to where they would like to go.
You remind me that it's really important when someone comes to us, we want to find out two things. One is it that they want. So they have an intention, obviously, in coming. There's something that they want. And as we're discovering what they want, to keep in mind what is it that they actually need. And the want and the need can actually be the same or at times very separate. And I've come to appreciate we need to understand the want and be able to meet that with whomever we're working with as we're helping them really get to the need that's going to undermine and make them really happy in the long run. So the teaching that I've developed that has come to known as IRES, as you know, is based on a very deep and integrated map where we're learning how first to be really on comfortable terms with our body, our emotions, our thoughts. So a lot of the early healing, isn't it? It's healing through early trauma that we might have all experienced. These ways we've been compliant that are no longer working. So it's really helping us step out of those old clothes and put on a whole new wardrobe, we might say, where we're feeling very comfortable in our body, in our mind, and our senses. But that's really the first portal of the practice. The second is really touching that deep essence where when we touch it, we can feel how it's beginning to blossom into our life, these qualities like equanimity and peace and a deep core sense of well-being. Once we can really get in touch with that, I think of that as the second basic portal that we enter into through these teachings, because now we're beginning to stabilize ourselves. Not that we're doing that equanimity, but it now starts to do us. We're walking around as that sense of peace and equanimity, not as something we're striving to try to attain, but we've recognized it's been there all along. And now we're stabilizing in it. I think that's the third deep movement that then helps us more and more heal these subtle layers of separation where we've separated from different aspects in ourself. And as we come to understand that and they heal, those senses of separation just drop away. And more we feel we are, each one of us, a part of the universe and an important part. And then to me, that's the fourth piece where we really feel our non-separation. The fifth to me is the integration back down into our life and into all of our relationships and the work that we're doing in the world, so that we really are now uh, in that long adage of being peace. We're not being peaceful, we are being peace itself. And that's what we're bringing to every moment, that deep sense of equanimity and authenticity and spontaneity uh, that helps us meet each moment of life. And that is the core of the teaching, all those different stages that we'll all have to go through at some point.
Beautiful. So, at what point, I guess is the best way to ask this. I'm thinking about the the sort of the dialogue process that you have come up with, which is what I was so excited about at the beginning,
Mm-hmm.
um, where it's. I want you to speak on it more than
Mm-hmm.
me, but of course, a lot of people, when if you're familiar with iRest, you think of okay, we're most of us maybe lying on the floor or sitting comfortably in a chair, depending on what's best for our own bodies, and we're being taken into these different layers and levels of ourselves, and getting into or moving towards that essential nature, if you will. But you, through this work, also developed a way of engaging through conversation and sense perception. And so, this again, this is where I felt um, so delighted, just as a practitioner who does have dialogues, much like a psychotherapist might or a social worker might, where they might not have someone in front of them who wants to lie down and be taken through a guided meditation, and yet this work being accessible to them is very, very important.
Mm-hmm.
So I would love to hear however you want to share about that
Yeah.
part of this.
When we sit in meditation, called Yoga Nidra, a form of meditation, um, we're sitting there with the intention of meeting ourselves. But when we sit by ourselves, it's so quick that we can get drawn away, isn't it, into a thought, into a daydream. But when we sit in front of another, when I sit with someone, I think of my role as a sacred mirror that I'm helping a person hold their attention long enough that they no longer get distracted by a thought or a daydream, but now they can begin to hone into themselves more and more deeply. And in simple terms, I think what I'm trying to do is help a person meet themselves, peeling away all the ways that they aren't who they are, the ways they've learned, the conditioning behaviors and all that, so they can really meet themselves at their deepest core level. So much of, I think, people's lives is, how should I say it, wanting life to be other than it is. So the movement of, I want more of this that is slowly being removed from my life, or I don't want this that life is bringing into my life. So those two qualities of aversion and attachment. What I'm trying to do when I sit in front of another person is act as a sacred mirror to help them meet life just as it is. So there may be then, as we're talking, an emotion that spontaneously arises that they may have been struggling with, and I'm helping them meet it, not to change it, which is the way most of us, don't we? We come to a situation where we're feeling uncomfortable with a particular emotion or experience, and we want to resolve it. We want to overcome it. We want to get back to a sense of equanimity or happiness. Paradoxically, it is our desire to overcome it, to get rid of it, to change it, which is actually the obstacle that's preventing it from resolving. And so, really, the first step that I'm trying to do with the person is helping them see all the ways that they've been avoiding being with. And then for maybe the first time in their life, really be with the emotion or be with the thought or be with the experience that happened that they haven't fully metabolized. And it's such a sweet moment because when a person really meets themselves and is able to stay with what's unfolding, that transformation happens automatically. They'll go right through their experience into a whole new understanding. And from the outside, it can look remarkably simple of what just happened because all they were doing was meeting themselves and they've come into this moment of deep transformation. And so it looks in a way magical from the outside, but from the inside, it really is just putting down our aversions, putting down our attachments, putting down how we wish life were, and meeting it on its own terms. And then I, as a sacred mirror, is helping them really do that, helping them meet themselves moment to moment to moment. And we do that somatically, as you know, at the sensorial level. What are the sensations that are present? We do it at the emotional level. What are the emotions that are present? We do it at the cognitive level. What are the images, memories, thoughts, beliefs that we're getting caught in? And slowly we can clear the debris away. And as that debris is being cleared away, that sense of deep essence or presence just automatically begins to come foreground. And it's been remarkable at times when I'm in a dialogue with someone and they're coming to resolve certain emotional states that have been causing them upset or suffering in one way or the other. And I'll stop them and I'll say, is there anything else here that you have yet to comment on that if you just take a moment and notice, is there anything else here? And they'll take a moment and they'll say, well, now that you mention it, there is this kind of quality of presence. And I'll say, well, what happens if you just stay with that? And there's that beautiful blossoming of that deep sense of being and presence that had been obscured by the thoughts or the emotions or the unmetabolized psychic material, that once that drops away, that presence can fully blossom foreground.
Beautiful. I think about just even on its own how powerful and potent it is to be in a shared space with someone where there is full permission, for lack of a better word, to just deeply express. Um, I think my findings are that a lot of times people have that dis-ease or distress or challenges as part of the compliance or conditioning that
Hmm.
we many of us are not given the permission or the space to just share what we feel or share what we think or share what's coming up for us. Sometimes for no other reason, it's just uncomfortable for other people. I think about things like grief or trauma. If someone has had a trauma, let's say, it's not that other people don't care about the trauma, it's that they can become uncomfortable with their own experience around trauma and intense feelings that other people might have. And so they may avoid even creating that space for the person to just share what needs to be shared. And so I feel there's so many layers of healing and levels of healing when we're just in that safe space. And then you add to it this aspect of self-inquiry as you're in a I feel like a very co-regulated type of space. You talk about that mirroring, and
Hmm.
it feels like there's this sense of co-regulation I have found in my sessions with people when I'm working with this specific modality, where the combination of holding that open space where they are free to say anything that they need to say at any time, and it will be held so that they can do with it what they need to do with it. Um, and then being in that co-regulative space where I think one of the most profound things that I've seen outside of that sense of being awareness itself, which I mean, it's like if that wasn't enough, is how there are certain emotions that I've seen people have that they have been so afraid of. But the minute that they give it space, I don't want to oversimplify or minimize, but it is amazing to see how much more quickly it can be let go of to a certain degree, varying degrees. But I think it is often, from my experience, it's that holding on that causes more of the disruptive pattern, that when we break away from it and set that emotion free and speak what we need to speak, there becomes the vastness within us that we then get
Hmm.
to be in the experience of.
We all deeply want to be seen and heard. We want a sense of being connected and a sense of belonging. I think those are primary needs within all of us. And often we're defending, as you say, against feeling certain uh, emotions, certain feeling, body sensations, having certain thoughts. And as you say, when we're in an environment that allows us to have those experiences, there is a spontaneous letting go. We're not letting go of the emotion lets go of us when it's fully felt. And when we're with another who themselves has that sense of deep equanimity because they've resolved those issues within themselves, as you say, we're in a co-regulating environment. We could actually theoretically sit in silence with another who's suffering. And if we are ourselves bringing that sense of regulated quality in our own being to them in that moment, they will begin to feel some sense of beginning regulation within themselves. Because aren't we? We're fields. I'm a field of presence. You're a field of presence. I'm actually sitting in your field and you're sitting in mine, even though we're on a Zoom.
Mhm.
We're still in the field because there isn't ultimately separation. And so the field begins to regulate whomever is sitting in that field into that field's regulation. So I think there's several things that I'm aware of in the dyad process when we're sitting with another human being. We are there as a sacred mirror. So we're saying, I really want to hear and see you. And I don't want to change you. I don't want to make you other than you are. I really want you to unfold yourself. And so that's one of the secret sauce ingredients of a dyad. The other is that I'm sitting here in a quality of equanimity or regulation that you may begin to feel that within yourself because it already exists within you. It just may have been covered up. And if I'm sitting with that recognition of non-separation, very gently it's going to be resonating that quality within you because that already exists within you that again may have been covered up. So there's a kind of a secret sauce, isn't there, in a one-to-one relationship. You know, it reminds me that we have these principal needs, don't we? We have the need to survive. We have the need to be part of a group because if we find ourselves by ourselves, we could not survive. So we want to be part of a group, a sense of belonging. There's the sexual need for procreation or just the sexual need for intimacy. It doesn't have to be sex itself, it can be a deep need for intimacy. What most people don't recognize is we all also have an enlightenment drive. We all have a drive to end suffering and to find that deep sense of equanimity and peace. And we can be trying all sorts of things that ultimately don't work, like you were trying alcohol early on. That ultimately doesn't work. Drugs can be helpful, but then ultimately they're not the solution. Slowly, we want to eliminate everything that's not working, and then we come to what really does work. And hopefully, eventually, we find someone we can sit in front of, as you're saying, who is helping us re-regulate our system. Certainly, my first mentor really did that for me. She had a very regulated system. And when I would sit with her, I could really feel my dysregulation. And by comparing my dysregulation to her regulation, I began to peel away the things that didn't work for me. And she was very instrumental in providing what you're saying, that atmosphere where I felt I could fully expose myself, be totally vulnerable, totally open. And that helps me peel away all the places that didn't work and come to that deeper essence. And I think we all need that at some point. We need if you want to call it a mentor, a teacher, someone we can sit with who really can allow us to unfold ourselves completely. And I think we need, in certain ways, a guidebook that can help us understand the principles by which we can undo our negative emotions and thoughts that we've been trapped in and come to a deeper ability to be with ourselves moment to moment.
Yeah, when you talk about a guidebook, I think about um, my husband and I have two daughters. They're stepsisters. I only say that because when I say they're both the same age, I get asked, are they twins? And every time, no. But I've been very grateful that we have been able to share iRest with them as teenagers. And some of their friends as well. And I have thought to myself so many times, oh my gosh, if I had had just a shred of this when I was their age, because I was a seeker at a very early age. I was having very interesting experiences that a lot of my peers were not having. And
Mm-hmm.
our daughters are quite similar, as are their friends. They're very interested, they're very engaged, they're very open. And through the teenage years, as I think most of us know, there are a lot of different challenges that we face. And so it has also been really fascinating to me. And it's still the deepest gratitude, another layer of gratitude, that as teenagers, these were made available to them, and the difference that it's made, that I know that they still come back. They don't stick with them quite as consistently as, say, myself or, many of my clients, but they know that it is a resource that they have access to, and they will revisit it again and again. And I know that it's planting a seed for some, or it's fertilizing their already planted seed. I should probably say.
I think of these teachings, they're very precious, and I think of them as the owner's manual we didn't get as children.
Yes.
And the manual that I put together that's now called I Rest, to me, is that owner's manual that is really teaching us or giving the skills from which to navigate both our inner environment and our outer environment. Um, you know, I know that we as human beings, we're expectation creating machines. We create expectations. And when we live with one another long enough as friends or in relationship as partners, or with our children, or just people we meet and form relationships with, we tend to build images of one another. And we tend slowly to relate to one another from those images. Part of the teachings, what I see is so important, is that we're learning how to see those images and keep peeling them off so that we're meeting ourselves fresh, we're meeting the people that we're with fresh, and we're meeting the world fresh. The reason I thought of that as you were talking about your children, my daughter from a very early age got very interested in these teachings, and she started going to my retreats at a very early age, around 8. And there was one retreat in particular when she was around 15 or 16, when during the retreat, the room was full of mirrors. So we were doing a lot of mirror gazing. And she had the most remarkable moment where, for the first time in her life, she said, "Dad, I feel like I peeled away all the images that I had become encapsulated in as a teenager and growing up, and felt this deep, deep freedom of just being myself, free of images of what I was imposing on myself and what I thought other people were putting on me." And I think that that makes all the difference. If we can slowly peel away the images that we hold ourselves captive in, peel away the images that we hold our partners, our friends in. And so we really are moment to moment meeting life just as it is, without the impositions of those images. We're going to find that incredible freshness from moment to moment. And we can call them spiritual teachings, but I think it's really just about learning how to be a good human being.
Yeah.
I threw away the word spiritual a long time ago. It's just about being a very good, responsive human being.
It's funny, I just said something similar to my one daughter who's in her first relationship, and she was concerned because this young man at 22 is not as interested in religion or spirituality in the way that she is. And I said, "Well, isn't he a good person though? He's very kind, he's very compassionate, he's very service oriented." And she said, "Yeah." And I said, "I don't know, that sounds pretty spiritual to me in your terms. He just doesn't call it that." And her face grimaced, like, "Wait a second." Um, and what you're sharing reminds me too. So my husband and I had a yoga studio for several years that we ultimately gave up because it was not for us.
Mhm.
And one of the things that we noticed was the glorification of some of the yoga teachers, right? There were the popular teachers that there was, for some, there was even maybe a little obsessiveness about these
Mhm.
teachers and this, deifying of them. And I would consistently remind the students and frankly the teachers to not own that. For the teachers to not own that and to, if they were willing, to send those projections right back to their students, because what the students were seeing in them, I believed, were these incredible aspects of themselves that they had yet to integrate about themselves. So when they see beauty and brilliance and health and well-being and all of these things that I feel are innately our nature, they're sort of disassociating themselves from it and making this other person the poster child of that thing. And so it was a conversation that we had at our yoga studio where, own that about yourself, and really let yourself settle in and be with that to the best of your ability. And so even though I was a little bit more in your face conversation about it, I feel like iRest is a beautiful practice that helps us. It's the way that I would say it as it works in relationships is it sort of sets other people free to be who they are rather than being our own projection of who we want them to be or think they are, just as much as it does for ourselves. So I feel like it's such an incredible service for anyone and anything that we're relating to, because then we're not tangled in all of these assumptions and expectations and things that I need you to be or not need you to be. It helps us just naturally sort of come out of that. And for me, that is another incredible gift of this.
Yeah, projection is a major element. We all need to recognize how, when a famous person, quote unquote,
Mm-hmm.
walks into the room, people often get the heebie-jeebies and get all nervous. But it's just another human being who's walked into the room. As you're saying, we're projecting our strengths
Mm-hmm.
onto them, or our desires or our wants onto them. If we can, as you say, re-own them, then yeah, we can have respect for the person and the accomplishments that they've done in their lives. Um, but we're just in the room with another human being. And we need to re-own those projections that we put out onto others in all the different ways we do it, so that we can break free of those projections. And as you say, not lay them on to the person in front of us. And so then we're just meeting them fresh with curiosity, with interest, one human being to the other, in a moment of not knowing. Um, there are different qualities I've come to really respect. Everything is uncertain, everything is changing. I have no idea where I'm going to be 1 minute from now. I have no idea when I'm working with someone what they need. I it's the relationship again, and it's our comfort level, I think, with being with uncertainty, with being that everything is changing. There's nothing that we can depend on that's substantial. There's an insubstantiality about everything. A mountain looks substantial, but ultimately it's just going to dissolve into grains of sand. So I think as we become more and more comfortable with uncertainty, everything's changing, and a sense of not knowing, then we come to the moment open, curious, free of the images. And that to me makes all the difference, keeps everything really simple and easy. I have my own ways of moving through life as simply as I can. And one of them is moment to moment, I'm just trying to ascertain, does this feel right?
Mm.
Or does this not feel right? So I've thrown out words like good and bad, right and wrong, should and shouldn't. I'm just asking, does this feel right or does it not feel right? And I can consult that deep intelligence within myself that I've come upon that is informing me this feels right and this doesn't feel right. And that takes a certain way of personalness out of it. I'm just listening to what life is asking of me moment to moment. I was working with a woman a few months ago who's very religious, um, comes from a very strong Catholic background. And as we were talking, she was saying, I want this and I want this and I need this. And I stopped her at one point and I said, have you ever asked yourself, what is it that God wants for me? And it was like a startling moment. She said, no, I never have. And I said, well, take a moment. What does it feel like instead of saying, I want this? Why don't you reframe it as, what does God want for me right now? Another person, I reframe it as asking them, what does life want of me right now? So we're really then listening, aren't we, moment to moment to life itself. We can frame it as God or in religious terminology, but it really becomes moment to moment. What is it that this moment is asking of me? And can I give all of me to this moment, not knowing where it's taking me? So I got to be comfortable with not knowing and with the unknown. And that to me gives us a sense of aliveness and spontaneity and keeps us really young. To me, that's where I think the fountain of youth is, or
Mm.
the cornucopia is. When we're able to meet life on its own terms, we keep being refreshed, and a spontaneity and an aliveness then is there moment to moment.
Gosh, there's so much I want to dive into with all of that. Yeah, I'm so aligned with that. It's funny because as my husband and I became empty nesters and got rid of our yoga studio, we got rid of our physical home and we live mobile. And everything is always uncertain for us, and we're always on limited resources. And there's always things coming at us, but we decided that we wanted it to be an adventure and that we were going to allow ourselves to be in the spontaneity of it and to be in the uncertainty of it and to work with our attachments and to work with our aversions and to work with the ways that we think things were supposed to be or not supposed to be, and really lean into a lot of the teachings that we're talking about. And it's really been a wild and very fulfilling and very it's so fulfilling and interesting. It's so interesting. We have our 4 pets with us too. This is crazy fun. um, and I think about myself, or the version of who I thought I was 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and how I hadn't yet developed the degree of self trust that it requires. And so, and I think also self esteem. I know, like, just as an example for myself that I know others can relate to, we sort of alluded to it before. Um, I'm accustomed to dancing to the beat of my own drummer and doing things because I just know that I feel guided to do them. But that hasn't always come easily. I moved across the country because I knew deeply through a meditation that that was what I was supposed to do, and I had nothing else to go on. And people thought I was absolutely nuts, but I was so guided. And it was interesting that obviously I was met with challenges, but there were so many synchronicities along the way of things falling into place in ways that I could have never planned or strategized if my life depended on it. And so I took those as my own sort of nod of, okay, and it has worked out to be a beautiful experience for me. And I think about we go back to this notion of conditioning and compliance. And if we're still sort of wrestling with a good deal of that, let's say,
Mhm.
I'm certainly not healed from it. I know I've progressed some. um, but what the sort of how challenging it can be for some to step into and be more of the embodiment of what we're talking about today, when it can be confronting with family, a marriage, a job, many of the societal conditions. I can say from my own experience, the more that I have leaned into myself in that state of beingness, I don't find those challenges to be nearly what my mind would have made them up to be many years ago, because the embodiment of the experience of my true nature is so much bigger than all of that, that I think it's easier for me to process those challenges. But I'm bringing this up because I think of potentially the listener who's hearing us and they're saying, okay, that's all fine and good, and that sounds wonderful. And here I am with these conditions and these responsibilities. And what happens? How do I hold the full spectrum of all that we're talking about here?
A simple metaphor comes to me as you're speaking. Um, I feel we've all been given a garden to tend. Some of our gardens are very tiny, some of them are quite large. Some of us swim in tiny little ponds, and some of us swim in larger ponds, and some people swim in very large, large ponds. But we each have a garden to tend. When I look out about me, what I see is everybody trying to tend everybody else's garden, and their garden is full of weeds, and is laying fallow. And so, what I'm trying to do, and I think I hear the same thing with you, is first we tend our own garden
Mm-hmm.
to get our own life in order. And as we're continuing to hone our own garden, what I've come to realize is other people lean over and say, gee, you've got a beautiful garden there. Would you be at all interested in helping me with my garden? And more, I find life becoming one of service. We're continuing to need, and I think that that's what meditation does, hone our own garden, keep tending it and making sure that it's fertilized well and getting proper water and sunlight and all of that. Um, but I think we need to stop short of climbing into other people's gardens. We need to be invited. And I think we know that around the world, there's enough food to feed everyone. There's enough healthcare to make everyone in the world healthy. There's enough to educate everyone in the world, but everybody is outside their own gardens. And if everybody tended their own garden, then more and more, I think each one of us would be coming into a life of service.
Mm.
Because I think ultimately that's where we'll all land up when we clean our own lives up, we get everything in order, and we feel moment to moment, as you're saying, we're listening to what life is asking of us. And yes, sometimes it asks us to change our job, change where we're living, step out of an old relationship that has completed itself. Um, I like the idea that some relationships that we're going to be in are short term, some are long term, but each one is going to have a moment of completion. And we're learning how to move on when that's so. Um, but yeah, how do we listen to what life is asking of us? Take the adventure that we're all on in life. But I think ultimately we do land in this life of service where we're clean enough here, where people are leaning over and saying, looks pretty good over there. Can you help me over here? And we'll say, well, I can offer my services as best I can, and we do what we can for others.
Mm. I love that. I'm reminded of a quote. I cannot remember her name at this moment, but she wrote the book called Mating in Captivity, and she does a lot on relationships, and she's a brilliant woman. And she said, I've been married 3 times. She said, but I've been married 3 times to the same man. And that really spoke to me, because I think there is space too for if anyone is feeling confronted with what we're talking about, is to remember too that even relationships that are for, let's say, longer term, whatever that means, they will also have their cycles, and that's a natural cycle as well. That life in many ways, as we're here in this human form, it really is about cycles.
Hmm.
I mean, we have them during the day and we have the seasons, and everything is some form of cycle. And I think, allowing space for that and adding to it what we were talking about before is setting that person, place, or thing free so that they're outside of our projections, or as you're putting it, so we're tending to our own garden so that then they get the choice to tend to their own garden or not. It's completely up to them.
Hmm.
Um, but then what we're really doing is we're releasing those attachments that could be keeping us depressed or anxious or whatever is not working for us, so that we can be in the natural cycles and rhythms and see what that higher intelligence and that essence of the true nature of ourselves, the other, and the cosmos at large, like, what does this want to be? As we ask, like, what does life want from me? Well, what does this relationship, what does this dynamic, what is this calling out of me right now that could help be a catalyst and serve as a way for me to lean in more deeply and come home to myself.
As you're speaking, I'm reminded of people like Viktor Frankl. All right. He found himself in a concentration camp in very dire circumstances. And what he came to understand is it is the person who's able to continue to nourish that deep sense of value or meaning and purpose within themselves that is more likely to survive through dire circumstances. He saw that the people who gave up hope were the ones who often succumbed early. Whereas for him, while he was stripped of his life, he had written a book. That book was stripped from him. He found himself obviously in really dire circumstances of starvation and suffering. And yet he was able to nourish his own garden moment to moment and keep peeling away the projections he could have fallen into and keep nourishing this deep sense of well-being. Because I'm thinking of all the people as you were talking who are in dire circumstances, who are not living in cultures where they can speak out freely. They are concerned day to day about their own well-being, their survival. And yet we see that even in those circumstances, there are those people who have recognized what I'm saying about their own garden and they continue to nourish it even as they're walking about in the life that they are. And what I see often is those are the people that ultimately become the lights for others. And I love what Buddha said in his last statement. Theoretically, he is supposed to have said when he was asked by his students any final advice. And he said, be a light unto yourself, that that light may light other people's light up as you move through your own lives. And I think that's a really important piece to keep in mind. We can be in very dire circumstances. Our survival can be entirely threatened. We can be in poverty. And yet, if we keep nourishing that inner light um, and keep asking, okay, what does life want of me in this moment, and keep peeling away the projections, keep peeling away the feeling of aversion and attachments, we can meet life on its own terms and feel our way through the circumstance that we're in and become a service to the people around us. So I know that you and I, for instance, live in a very privileged world here in the United States. We're in privileged positions. And yet I've been able to dip into so many places where people are not in privileged situations, helping them find that light within themselves that then makes all the difference in their lives and to the lives of the people
Mhm.
around them. I had a very good friend who was in the Peace Corps serving in some of the areas where there was deep civil wars and people were killing each other. And yet he found households that at night they would still be celebrating. We're alive. We have loved ones around us. So let's take this moment to appreciate what we do have and keep that light burning, even under the dire circumstances that they were finding themselves in. So that's certainly a deep message I want to keep helping people understand. We can be in the worst possible situation and yet still feel a deep inner sense of well-being that is meeting the moment, just like Viktor Frankl did and other people have done around the world, and use them as our mentors, as our examples. That's certainly what I have done with all my teachers, not glorifying them, as you were saying, but trying to get inside them, look out through their eyes. How are they seeing the world? And how might I begin to see the world the way they're seeing it and come to that deep recognition of equanimity and peace in my own life, which I'm very happy to say that I have been able to come into that moment and now share it with others.
Yeah, it really is a gift. I think about my husband and I had about 2 years of significant loss after loss after loss after loss, and um, it was just a very challenging time. And yet, my mother and I are really close, and I remember saying to her, what's so interesting is I am still in the midst of all the grief and the sadness. There is a part of me that is so deeply fulfilled and content. So it wasn't even so much like, oh, I'm brimming with joy and happiness, and just because my world feels like it's falling apart, I paste a big smile on my face and I'm good because there's nothing to fix. It wasn't like that. It was a very deep sense of trusting, trusting myself, trusting that there was something inherently much larger and greater at play, and trusting that this moment would pass and something would blossom from it. Feeling connected, as I was talking about, like the cycles, feeling connected to the cycles and the natural cycles of there is loss. That is a part of a cycle. It's
Mhm.
not to minimize it, but that's nothing more than a part of a cycle of being here. It's truly everything at some point will come to an end that isn't part of that one true reality. That's, when you're talking about everything changes. And so being in my own feelings with it, and yet simultaneously having this rich experience that was deeply and profoundly changing for me, where I felt like I reached a different sort of ground within myself, where I sort of landed into that eternal aspect of myself in a way that I hadn't before, because I felt so connected to it. And that I feel with so much going on in the world these days, no matter what country you look in, and no matter if we're looking at it from healthcare or nutrition or food or politics or war, we have examples all over the place. And again, this is not meant to minimize in any way, because the pain is real. The suffering is a true, valid experience that people are having. And yet having the ability, like, to me, talk about privilege, having the ability and the capacity to even lean in to these kinds of teachings, for me, is a miracle, because I know that not everyone has been exposed. And so, to your point, just even being an example of being the peace, and being, my husband and I talk about the middle path a lot, just being able to be in that middle zone. It really is significant, because I know I appreciate if my pendulum has swung in one way or another, and I'm in the presence of a dear friend who is really good at just really staying in that zone. It's like, oh, right, I can drop back into that. So I would love to hear a little bit about the birth of the International Association of Yoga Therapists and also the Institute for Spirituality and Psychology, if you would like to share a little bit more about those. Hold on, I lost sound. Hold on 1 second, I lost sound.
That working? Recording yeah. In progress. Okay.
Now we're good.
I grew up in a medical family and reading medical textbooks as I grew up. My dad was a surgeon. I looked at one time of going to medical school, then chiropractic school, and decided to stay with my love of psychology, meditation, and yoga. But I was really interested in then how could these regimens be used for healing, both psychologically and physically? And so many people that in the early years of my teaching, say hatha yoga and pranayama meditation, many of the people were coming with degrees of suffering, whether it was physical or psychological, mental. And so I got very interested in the therapeutic use of yoga and began to read journals from India where research was being carried out and some in the United States. And then in 1980, January, I found myself in India studying with TKV Desikachar and his background in the therapeutic use of yoga. And while I was there, I met a very interesting fellow who's become one of my best friends, Larry Payne, and he and I started talking. And we both had the same realization that perhaps what we were learning, we could form an institute that could help other people grow into what we were learning and benefit. So we came back in 1980 and began to hatch the rudiments of what would become the International Association of Yoga Therapists. And Larry, with his background in marketing, took on the admin marketing aspects. With my background in medicine, I founded the journal, the Journal of the International Association of Yoga Therapists. And we put it on the map, launched, I think, around 1983. And now it has become a very international association. Larry and I were given canes a few years ago as the founding fathers, you might say grandfathers now. And so I'm happy to see how it has become an instrumental organization worldwide now, and setting standards for yoga teachers and their education, both in terms of yoga, but also in this domain of yoga therapy. Mm-hmm. Along the way, because of my background in meditation and as a clinical psychologist, a group of us were really interested in the differentiation between what we might call a spiritual emergence and a psychotic episode. Mm. And that we saw many people who were being labeled psychotic were actually having very deep spiritual emergency experiences that were being mislabeled. At the other end, there were people who were reporting deeply spiritual experiences, but in fact, they were entering into more psychotic episodes in their life. There was a time where I did do a stint in a psychiatric hospital. I did a lot of work with psychiatric diagnosis, schizophrenia, psychosis, and became very familiar in how to work with people in the midst of these kind of florid experiences. But also because of running an institute and getting known for the work I was doing, I had more and more people coming to me who were actually having spiritual emergencies, we might say. So a group of us got together and we founded the Institute for Spirituality and Psychology. I became the founding co-president along with a friend of mine, David Lukoff. And we put together a uh, way of interviewing therapists, psychologists, psychiatrists, uh, uh, licensed social workers, and others who had a therapeutic background in licensing and who wanted to learn how to differentiate between what is, we might say, a psychotic episode and a spiritual emergence. And we put together a database of therapists who we felt had the ability to meet people where they were, make that discerning diagnosis and give the proper, what we might call treatment, whether it was helping them through the navigation of that spiritual experience or helping them ground if they were having a more psychological experience. So we ran that for a number of years, and then we handed it actually over to the California Institute of Integral Studies to continue the process that we had created over the years. I think now that that institute has been fallow because California Institute of Integral Studies has gone on to other things. But it was very instrumental for many of us for about 10, 12 years where we did great work, um, had wonderful discussion groups amongst ourselves and elucidating our own understanding, the experiences that we were trying to share with others. And actually, a number of publications have actually come out of that time that other people have written books about how to work with spiritual emergency. I think it's a very important topic because there is a continuum, we could say, between having a psychological experience and having a spiritual experience, and they can conflate one into the other. And we're learning how to give each one of those its proper due so that we can integrate at a psychological level and we can integrate at a spiritual level. I've certainly built that into my protocol where we're not doing a spiritual bypass, where we're only emphasizing awakening, although we are,
Mm-hmm.
and we're not doing a psychological bypass where we're only operating on a psychological level. We want to show how both are so important, and you can't have one really without the other. As we deepen into our psychological healing, our spiritual life will naturally evolve. And as we deepen into deep spiritual meditation, we're going to run into all of our psychology that we're going to then have to learn how to be operational with and on good terms with. So I love how the two really do come together. They're inseparate for me. Sometimes when I've been teaching a retreat, and a lot of people are bringing forward their psychological material, which we're helping them heal through during the retreat. People are saying, I'm getting confused. Is this a psychological retreat or is this a spiritual retreat? And my answer is always, this is a retreat. Or this is an advance, actually, where you're bringing all that you are and it's all here to be met and worked with. And so we don't want to say this is not to be here and this is the only thing to be here. We're saying, no, all of you is to be here in all of your different ways of being. And we need to have that complete healing to take place.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's really remarkable. Because yeah, the integrated and integrative approach, I think is everything. I know I made a joke earlier about years of therapy, but I was in therapy for a number of years, which I am so deeply grateful for. I really feel like it helped sort of put me back together,
Mhm.
and unglue and unbound and unhinge and all the things. And although my therapist at the time, this was back in the late 90s, early 2000s, we didn't talk a lot about spirituality. She was spiritually minded, and there was space for that. But as you said, I noticed that I got to a point where I I was ready to progress into more of the spiritual side of things, where I felt compelled to find my spiritual teacher, to find someone who could help me then, as you're talking about, integrate the things. It was like, okay, I've cleaned out my closets, I've connected the dots, I've worked on some of that conditioning stuff. And I knew there was this inner prompting for the next layer of myself. And so it really is interesting how truly organic it is, that they will come together. It's, I think, not having the resistance about that. And I feel like in the world of therapy these days, I feel like there are more and more people getting on board with understanding why it's important to be more integrative. That having everything sort of in their own container, I don't feel like is where the consciousness is going. And it's, to me, it's imperative that clinicians, therapists, nurses, like so many different fields of people who are working with people as a profession, start to orient themselves towards this integrative approach, so that they know, like you were talking about, they, even if you're a nurse and you only have 5 minutes with someone, you at
Mhm.
least know what language, where, because it's kind of like, for a little while, it's sort of like speaking different languages, because we're speaking at different levels. And so at least understanding which language, which layer or level of this person do I need to meet them, so that I can help facilitate their care, even if it's to pass them on to the next person.
Yeah, I was thinking as you were speaking, if we want to become a carpenter, we don't just pick up a hammer and a screwdriver and a saw. We find a mentor
Ah.
who is going to help us grow into that skill.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so how do we, in our own daily lives, we may be in a certain uh, job, or we may be taking care of children, whatever we're doing. But I think at some point we need to be finding those mentors. They may be a friend. Like, I have a very good friend. We used to take a walk and have lunch once a week for years. And we would often trade back and forth. He would be the therapist one week and I'd be the patient. The next week, I was the therapist, he was the patient. So we may find it among peers, but ultimately, I think, as you're alluding to, we need to find mentors who are helping us grow both psychologically and spiritually. And that may come in the form of a best friend. I have really good friends. We hang out regularly. I have another friend I go and have lunch with every week, and we have these conversations that are exploring what's our psychology like, what's our spirituality like. And they may come, as you're saying, in the gift of a teacher, a mentor, who is going to help us explore those domains that, in all cultures, don't we? We always find there are shamans or religious leaders, spiritual leaders that people can seek out and turn to. So it doesn't matter where the culture is, where we are in the world, those people do exist if we have that interest. My own feeling, I'm sure you probably resonated. We put the call out, the person is coming to us. We just don't know how many milliseconds away they are. But if we put the call out, they are surely on their way. Our job then is to wait patiently or wait impatiently. I know that I waited very impatiently for some of my teachers to arrive at my doorstep, but they do come.
Mm-hmm.
And I have that implicit trust in life that life is going to give each of us, ultimately, when we put that call out, what we need.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. That is without a doubt been my experience too. Um, you know, as someone who's gone through yoga therapy training, one of the things that I really love about for me, the field of yoga therapy is it is so integrated, where, we can learn about something like eye rest while we're also learning about the function of the body, the sensory perceptions, the nervous system, you know, going through the grief cycle, heart disease, cancer. Like, again, it's not that I believe that practitioners or therapists or whatever these days need to cover all bases necessarily. I do think it's important that maybe there is a degree of specialty, like
Mhm.
I think that's important. But similar to what you were saying about carpentry is still having enough information about the peripheral view. For me, as an example, like I know where my scope of practice is and where it isn't. And I know that I know enough to know when I need to refer out.
Mhm.
When there is something deeply psychological going on, I'm not a psychotherapist. And so I know that that's outside of the bounds, but there has to be some level of understanding to know where those bounds are. And so I do love just the birth of yoga therapy as a field, because it does give such a beautiful range of people to have their specialization, but there's still this acknowledgement and honoring that it's integrative. To me, yoga just says this is integrated. It's integrative, it's integrated. So we could be working in the field of mind, body, or spirit, or all of the above at the same time. I mean, it's one will always affect the other, of course,
Mhm.
but there's an entry point, and if someone comes in with an acute situation, we have a good sense of that entry point. But so I appreciate that you established something that does help keep us within our scope of practice, but also helps give us the range that many of us feel like we would like to have. Like, I don't think I would do well being a psychotherapist because it would limit me and the places that I feel I need to go as a practitioner. And so that's part of why I feel that just this entire field of yoga therapy and things like iRest that give us the tools to be able to have that range. I mean, obviously, you don't have to be a yoga therapist to appreciate iRest. I personally, I've referred a lot of people to look at it as a training. Even there's even an asana yoga teacher who is sort of retiring out of that. She's close to 40. She's having a lot of physical stuff. She has a lot of life stuff. She's been doing it for a long time, and she feels like she's ready for her next thing. People love her. She's very deep. She's very invested in doing her own work and her own growth. And I was like, you would be magical at doing something like iRest. But I also think about the therapist that I had all those years ago who was open and who was wonderful. And she was exactly who I needed for the 5 years that I was with her. I can't imagine, similar to my daughters, I can't imagine what my time with her would have been like if she had access to something like iRest that she would have been working with me on. I mean, obviously, everything happens the way it should. I'm such an advocate for this kind of work because I feel that it is part of what helps us as a whole reestablish some sort of equilibrium and to guide us into, as you were talking about, learning how to serve ultimately. But on the way there, being that mirror, being that person for other people, and being that person for ourselves, for some of us, for once and for all.
Some years ago, the American Psychological Association did a research study on how often in the therapeutic office was there some mention of religion or spirituality. And the number astounded them. It came back as 70%. That 70% of people who were coming to therapists at some point were bringing in religion, spirituality, and their need for that kind of exploration. When I started this work, because I was principally in the field of yoga and meditation, all the people that were coming to our early trainings were yoga teachers, meditation teachers, and the like, and a few from the mental health regions. Now, I would say probably half to three-quarter of the people who come are uh, people in the either physical health or mental health.
Hmm.
So that, as you're saying, more and more we're seeing this wonderful integration where therapists are learning these skills that they can bring in. And so when people do bring up the topic of spirituality or religion, that they have a way of meeting the person at that deeper level, and it becomes part of their scope of practice, which I like.
Hmm.
And I'm finding the therapists who do come ultimately to our training often remark, I wish I had had this at the beginning of my practice. This would have totally revolutionized what I've been doing with people and will now do that from now on. So I love being able to come in and help people in the physical health domains, in the mental health domains, find this as a supportive, adjunctive, assistive practice that's going to help them hone their skills and better meet the people who are coming in with them. And, the foundation of physical and mental health, at least in the Western world, has been predicated on helping a person change. We're offering a slightly different slant, which is we're not trying to change the person. We're trying to help them reveal who they really are from the inside out. And then we can address what does need to change at a physical or a psychological level. But I think we need both. How do we help a person meet themselves and welcome themselves? And in that maybe too worn adage, fall in love with themselves, and then also help them find like therapeutic interventions that can help them with a physical issue or a psychological issue as well. So I think a trained practitioner uh, is in a way a medical practitioner. Buddha, for instance, it's often said, thought of himself as a physician. And he often said, do you want me to tell you how the arrow that is embedded in you was made and who made it and the materials that it is made out? Or do you want me to just help you pull it out and heal? And I think this is where we as teachers and psychologists and therapists, we can get into metaphysical discussions, but really what the person is asking of us is, how can I bring an end to my suffering?
Hmm.
And I think we need to get right in there with our hands dirty and really help them with these sacred tools so we can help them step out of their suffering. And then we can have a cup of tea and have metaphysical
Yeah,
discussions.
totally. Exactly. Yeah, I love that. It's one of the things I love about being an Ayurvedic practitioner because there too, we're not fixing anything that's broken. We're honoring nature. Nature has gone out of balance somewhere, and so let's explore where the imbalance is, where there's an accumulation or a deficiency in something, and let's just see, it's the misuse, the overuse or underuse of the senses is usually the thing. And that's what we go towards. And it's like, okay, so that's where the accumulation probably
Mhm.
came from. Let's go explore that and see how we can help the intelligence of nature, which is you,
Mhm.
reestablish equilibrium.
Yeah.
So I think all of these teachings from the East all point to this very thing where it's we're not broken, and we might feel like it, but that's a feeling. That is a passing feeling that doesn't
Well,
just calcify.
isn't that's the separation between who I am and as someone who has a body and has emotions and has thoughts, but I am more than those body, mind, emotions, and thoughts. I am something much more intangible and yet recognizable. So then, knowing that and having that ground of stability, I can then meet the body and where it may be suffering or the mind is having a difficult time. But I'm meeting it from a very different place, from not what's wrong with me. Oh, no, I'm fine. Oh, you mean my body and my mind? Uh, we're always in a party somewhere and somebody is saying, "How are you?" And I think the only true answer we can give is, "I'm fine." Oh, are you talking about my body or my mind? Oh, today my body's having a hard time. It's kind of tired, and my mind's struggling with this grief or this sadness that's happened because a friend of mine died. But me, hey, I'm fine. It's the same thing if somebody says, "How old are you?" The first thing I think we should be able to say is, "I have no clue."
I know.
Ageless, timeless. Oh, you mean how old is the body? Oh, well,
That's right.
the body's 77 or whatever.
Yeah.
I think we need to make that distinction between who we are and these bodies and these minds that we have along for the ride, and we don't conflate and confuse the two. I'm fine. I have no idea how old I am, but the body, yeah, that's got an age. It's got an expiration date.
Mhm.
I don't happen to have a birth date or an expiration date, but the
Yeah.
body does.
Yeah.
And if we can make that separation interestingly, it brings us to a very deep recognition of another quality of non-separateness that we can feel our place in the universe.
Mm. Yeah, I love that. So I feel like the energy is wrapping up a little bit here, but I would
Mhm.
love to just ask one more question. Has there been anything that sticks out for you that has just absolutely surprised you in your work?
I would say I have to come back to now knowing how to invite a person very early on into an experience of them discovering what's right about themselves and has always been right, but somehow they misperceived it, fell out of grace with it, however you want to put it. They've forgotten. And how simple that remembering really is within about 15 or 20 minutes. Uh, Anybody can touch that deep sense of grace. And so that has surprised me because early on, when I was studying these teachings, it was often put out that this is going to be decades and decades before you can realize these teachings. And I've come to appreciate that that's actually false.
Mm.
We can realize the ultimate recognition and understanding in a very simple manner within a few minutes. Pragmatically, I understand our psychology can then cover it over again. But that process of remembering over and over again, to me, makes the teachings and the work at one level very simple. And we can build in what I call mnemonic devices where we can continue to remember all day long. And so I think it's the person's curiosity and interest in remembering that makes all the difference. And some people, in that curiosity and that interest, the metaphor is they're like very soaked logs. They need to get around a strong fire to dry out, and that's going to take time. Others are like dry kindling that are ready to catch fire. I think I was like a dry kindling when I got around my first mentor. I just caught fire immediately. Um, but I think what surprised me is how simple and immediate the recognition can be. And then, yes, it does take years to peel a glimpse of who we truly are. And that can take place literally in just a few moments, it makes all the difference. It inspires that sense of, oh, there is a cure here. There is hope, that there can be an end to my suffering. I'm still going to die. I'm still going to have old age. I'm still going to have sickness. But I can find a peace and an equanimity and a well being that is truly indestructible. Um, Time tests that out and reveals that it is indestructible. We have a propensity within each one of us to have that deep core sense of well being that we meet each moment from. And I think that makes all the difference. So, surprise, simplicity, the immediacy of recognition that can happen, and the tremendous transformative power that has. I mean, in that one Yoga Nidra I had in 1970, which is at the end of an hour and a half class, all of maybe 10 minutes,
Mm.
launched me into my entire career. We all can have those moments that set the dial for us for the rest of our lives. And may it be so for everyone.
May it be so. I love that. Thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here and having this lovely conversation. I hope others enjoyed it as much as I do.
Well, thank you. It's a joy to meet and partake in these kind of discussions and elucidations, and just felt shared presence too.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
And for everyone listening, we'll make sure to have all of the information about Richard in the show notes so that if you're interested in learning more about iRest or anything else that he's up to, you'll be able to easily access it there. So we will have you taken care of on that front. And so once again, I'm Sita Severson from the Soul of Yoga Institute in Encinitas, California. And I'm delighted that you spent this time with us today, and I look forward to seeing you here next time.